Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Alex's Afternoon Art Show. Today we are drawing Green Lantern, John Stewart Green Lantern to be specific, and I think I wanted to talk about lighting. I actually didn't remember what I wanted my topic to be before starting. And yeah, we're getting there in terms of the darkness now, so this is the afternoon. Doesn't look like it, but it is. But yeah, so this one, given the fact that I'm drawing Green Lantern, realistically speaking, color-wise, this shouldn't be too challenging because we've got 2 to 3 colors to do in very small amounts. Now, there's going to be some, I wanted to do some lighting stuff because I wanted to have some glow layers and things like that, have a thin layer, kind of a glow around him, stuff like that, because we're dealing with John Stewart Green Lantern. That's typically how he is drawn, of where he's got a thin sort of layer of glow around him. But I'll talk about that stuff when I get to it. But yeah, lighting is kind of what we're going for this time. So yeah, I'll roll the intro and then I'll show you what I have. So yeah. So yeah, this is where we are at. I didn't want to overcomplicate things, so most of this design is just going to be pretty much entirely black. Like, his arms are a little long. That is the only one which I will concede here. There's a bit of a weird proportional issue here. If his arms are a bit long. If these arms were straight, they'd be damn near touching his knees. So he's got pretty long arms. It's all in the bicep, really. His biceps are just a bit too long. I think that's the issue I'm having here, albeit I don't actually know. I think it's definitely the biceps. The biceps are just too long. If his arms are bent like this, they need to be stopping around the sort of middle of the ribs, meaning that they should be pretty much, the bend should be there, as opposed to down here, which means that whenever you turn the arm, it's stopping like somewhere like here, something like that, which is pretty long for an arm to be. Yeah, he's got very long arms and kind of short legs. It's a bit of an odd proportional one to think of, but yeah, that's kind of how the visual there's hitting my eye. Again, I think the sort of length of the arms is probably fine. Realistically speaking, I don't think it's that much of an issue. But yeah, we've got a bit of a low angle shot here, like a slightly low angle, so I suppose the arms are maybe fine if that's what we're going off of. Because you can see it mostly in his head, where we've got a bit of a low angle. We're seeing the bottom of the nose, we're seeing a bit of the bottom of the chin, underneath the brow, sort of stuff like that. Again, this is a bit of a low angle. You're seeing the back of the hand, all this sort of stuff. But yeah, let's just go off of that. Let's say it's a low angle, and that way the arms are somewhat explained by there just being a bit more of this on show, because it's supposed to be from underneath, meaning that we're seeing a bit more of it, even though technically speaking it does look pretty weird. I was very careful to make sure that the ring is on the right hand. It tends to be on his right hand, so that's what I went for. His right, obviously. But yeah, so I'll have to do some sort of I might have to do a hand-drawn lens flare on the ring, because that'll be another lighting element that I'll have to do. I think I'm going to have to hand-draw that on. Meaning I'll have to just sort of do various rotations like this and this. I'm just going to need to keep an eye on my numbers, really. So if I wanted to have a straight line which goes from -6, then the mirroring of that would be 106? Or no, that'd be an exact 1-to-1 mirroring. I would need 96, right? That would give me that'd be the way to give me the right angle, I think. In theory, yeah, that would work, because that would then give me that angle. Something like that, but that's another problem for another time. I'll get to that later, because that's none of that's part of our details. For now, yeah, as I say, what we've got in terms of our details here is a fairly standard design, nothing too crazy. A few little elements. I maybe overcomplicated the boots a little bit. There's a bit more going on here. But the thing is, each of the individual parts here are all fairly separate. Like the bracers, the upper body piece, and then the boots are all very separate. Like there's not really anything going on with the legs. There's not really much going on with the abdomen. He's got these little sort of lines along here just because I felt like it was a little too bare. But yeah, it's all fairly simple, and this is the thing, there's going to be a lot of black in this design. Like this whole area here is black. There's going to be the little bit of green on the bracers, the green on the top, and then the green of the boots. And then these are also going to be green. But then there's only going to be the tiny little bit of white around there. I don't think I'm going to give him gloves, because that's one of those ones of where it's completely inconsistent. Sometimes he has gloves, like in Justice League he has gloves, but in a lot of the comic images that I have in front of me, a lot of the comic art I have in front of me, he tends to not have gloves a lot of the time. Sometimes he does have gloves. In the sort of old design he does have gloves, but it all varies. So yeah, it's inconsistent. Now, one of the things which I wanted to touch on was the fact of his beard and hair. Typically he has one or the other. He doesn't have hair and a beard. He's normally bald if he's got the beard, like in Justice League, or like also in Justice League he's got hair but no beard. I decided to do both because I sort of prefer the both, because I think it's a bit more interesting looking when he's got both. Now granted, the hair here I'm going to be doing pretty much is entirely just pure black, but I'll have to sort of cross-hatch in fade, because that's typically, in my experience, that's how you get a better looking fade if you're going to draw it in. You do a sort of harder edge, say for example, I'll have the flat edge along the top and then have the hairline go along here, have it go in like that, and then probably put a fine dark edge around there, and then just cross hatch the rest of it and then sort of fade that down, so that by the time it reaches around the ear it's mostly thinned out. I decided to give him a little notch in his hair here just to sort of imply a parting, because that's a sort of common enough thing that you see with his hair. Well, that's what I say, common enough. A lot of the time it isn't really there. He's typically got a pretty bad hairline in a lot of this stuff. That's really the only thing that's kind of consistent. I suppose sometimes he is bald, so yeah, he doesn't have an amazing hairline. Sometimes it's pretty flat, sometimes it dips real far back. But yeah, typically he's got a fairly tight crop with his hair. This is even a little bit more than he's normally got. His hair is normally like pretty cropped to the top of his head. But yeah, this is a little more hair than he would normally have in a lot of these images that I'm looking at. But I decided to go with this because I wanted to have it sort of give it the sort of military kind of tight cropped flat top sort of thing. Because that sort of fits in my mind. It's giving the sort of like the kind of more military look in terms of the hair. I'll be giving his eyes, I'll be making his eyes green, and the sort of have the glow. But what I will do is I'll still have the whites of his eyes still be white, but this will just be green, a light green, and then have that glow from there. And it's sort of the same thing I'll do with the ring. I'll have to hand draw in the lens flare, but then I'll do a bit of a glow coming from it, just so that it sort of fills out the rest of the shape, because otherwise it'll look a bit flat, I think. Yeah, is there anything else I really need to cover? I don't think so. I think we're pretty good for the most part. Is there anything I need to cover really? Symbol, I'll have to touch that up because yeah, this version that I've drawn here was pretty hasty. So it's not great looking. I'll have to touch that up later. But yeah, is there anything else I need to cover? Obviously the background's going to be pretty dark. I'm going to have it be black at the edges, have it sort of a black vignette, and then have a sort of dark green around him, which will obviously be accentuated by his sort of light green glow. That'll be around the edge of him, because yeah, that's a typical element. But that's nothing I really need to worry about too much right now. I will just begin, and I will do these details, and then I'll be back to do the colours, which granted won't take very long because I've got skin, a little bit of hair, eyes, green, black, white. We've got 6 colours. So Not many to worry about here. I'll have to do some effects stuff there with the color layer, whenever I'm doing the color layers. So yeah, I'll probably do a lot of that sort of lighting stuff in the colors, but obviously I'll come back to that when I've done the colors. So yeah, anyways, I'll do these details, I'll be back to do the colors, and then so on and so forth. So yeah. Okay, that's our details done. Again, I didn't really change anything. I sort of kept it pretty clear to what I had. I tried to emphasize the musculature where possible. It's funny that the boots seem a lot bigger now because of how intricately designed they are. They just seem a lot bulkier. What's funny is that a lot of the sort of the green parts, which are a little bit more armory in look, with the way they're sort of plated and things overlap and things like that, it kind of ends up smoothing things out. Now I tried to sort of keep a little bit of the sort of emphasis there of the sort of beefiness of his shoulders and his legs and his arms and stuff like that intact, but a little bit of it did get sanded off by the sort of smoothness of these armory bits, which will all be green. I think I made the symbol a little cleaner. It's a little, some of the lines are a little hairy, but I think it's fine. I think the fade on the hair looks pretty good. It's been a while since I've had to do a fade in terms of that, but this is kind of really the only way I know how to do it. Now obviously this sort of line here is still very emphasized. I might maybe, you know, I'll thin that out. I'll thin that line out because I think it's a little much, the sort of how clear that line is there. I think it should be a little bit more obscured. I think the fade should be a little bit more subtle than that. I think that looks a little better. And yeah, it fades more intensely at the side than it does at the back, so that just looks a little bit more accurate there. Might even just do a little line through the back there just to smooth that out a little bit. But yeah, that looks alright. Okay, so yeah, now we are moving into colors, which means I'm going to have to do the background as well. Now granted, our background is literally just going to be a fairly simple gradient. It's just going to be, again, a dark vignette with a sort of maybe a slightly different shade of green than what we're going to be going for, because there's technically two shades of green that are going to be in effect here. There's going to be our lighter green, which is going to be the eyes, the ring, and his sort of outer glow. And then there's going to be the darker green, which will be his sort of the actual green that will be in the costume, which is a little bit darker, a little bit slightly bluer, whereas our other one will be slightly closer to yellow. Again, I always sort of word it this specific way of where it's like, okay, you've got your green, there's a more mid-green. Well, yeah, probably what we're going to be going for overall won't be that far outside of a mid-green, but our sort of our outer glow will be somewhere more down here, and then our interior green will be a bit more like this, a little bit more on the sort of slightly more on the bluer side. But largely we're going to be dealing with black, because that is the sort of core body color here, with the sort of underlying undersuit. Again, I didn't want to over detail the undersuit. That was something which I thought about a little bit before, about adding maybe a few more lines or stuff like that, but I just have these little lines which sort of move through it a little bit, just so that it sort of adds a little bit of movement to the costume, just without going too crazy and over detailing things. Again, I feel like the boots are maybe a little over designed, but the upper body piece is just right, I think, with these sort of little boxy areas and stuff like that added to the shoulders and the outer edge. I think it just sort of adds a little bit more. But yeah, so with this, one of the things which I wanted to mention, which is the sort of funny irony of doing a lot of lighting showcases, and it typically means that you need to make things darker. If you're going to showcase lighting, typically the way to do that is to make things darker. Higher contrast makes certain things stand out more. So by virtue of having the darker background, that emphasizes the lighting on the character a little bit more, and the fact that there will be a subtle green behind him, which will then be emphasized by the glow that he himself will be emanating, that will just sort of create a little bit more of that. This is a sort of a funny thing to remark on, I think, the fact that in order to make the lighting more of a prominent feature of the drawing, you need to make everything darker. But granted, that's just sort of how it works. Again, contrast, more intense lighting is going to create more intense shadows, so I suppose in a sense that's sort of fitting for Green Lantern with the whole brightest day, darkest night thing. But yeah, is there anything else I need to cover here? Our colors shouldn't be too difficult. As I said before, there's only 6 colors, and most of them aren't particularly prominent, so it really shouldn't take very long. Now, of course, I'll have to do my background, and I'll have to do some glow, and the manual lens flare here, which, again, shouldn't be too challenging, but, again, I have to do it by hand, which is a little bit more than I would normally do. So, yeah. Anyways, I don't think there's anything else I need to cover. I think I will just do these colors, and then I'll be back to do the painted shading, which I'll have some more stuff to say then. But yeah, anyways, we'll move on. Alright, that is our colours and a great deal of our effects done. So I did a bit of a blend when it came to the hand-drawn lens flare. So I did the first bit of just sort of picking the directions and everything like that, doing my rotations and then just doing line, thinning it out at the end, then obviously getting a little thicker in the middle. Then I felt like that wasn't quite enough, so I added an outer glow, and I felt like even that wasn't quite enough, so I then added the little sort of notch like this. I did my sort of the way that you'd normally do a sort of a glow, which is you just use well, the way I do a lot of glows nowadays is I will pick the gradient, which has the sort of the circular gradient with the two lines coming out of it. It can be useful for lens flares, but oftentimes it creates sort of a very flat effect that doesn't have enough of a streak for my tastes. So a lot of the time that can end up looking a bit crap. So typically what I tend to do is I use this really only if I need a small effect. Like if I needed something for the eyes, like eye lens flares, I would use this, just do those like that, and then that would be the effect done. But for the lens flare on the ring, I felt like it just added a little bit, especially with the hand-drawn bits over it. So and then I changed that to be, what type of layer did I make the lens flare? It is a hard light layer, so it sort of adds this sort of, it looks a lot greener because of that. So then I did the eye glow. It's very subtle, but you can see it. It's pretty subtle, the eye glow. So then, after all that, I decided to add the sort of outer glow of his whole body. And a thing which you might have noticed me doing early in the colors is filling in around into his hair with the skin color. And the reason I did that was because otherwise I knew I'd forget to do that. And because I decided to add it as a layer, as a sort of a glow type, an effect on top of the as part of the color folder, that means that it wouldn't have reached this had I not filled that in up there, or it would have been a little too thin. Like you can even see it's a little thinner on the top of his head than it is, say, on his shoulders or his legs or so on and so forth. But yeah, ultimately that sort of comes out looking a little cleaner, the line around the edges, because I did all those little extra bits. And yeah, this is also why I put all my other effects outside the color folder, where sometimes I might include them as part of the color folder. I made sure to not put them in here because I didn't want them to affect the sort of glow layer around him. Yeah, what else did I need to cover? Yeah, I sort of kept things fairly simple with the colors. Again, I wanted it to be mostly just the sort of, again, the typical areas where you would get the greens. There's the two tones of green, there's the sort of slightly yellower green, which is around his edge, and then it's also the eye and the ring color. But then everything else is this sort of slightly bluer toned green. But yeah, I think that mostly has sort of come out alright so far. I've picked a color palette for what I'm going to be doing for my painted shading. It's going to be largely a bit bluey, a bit greeny, but the sort of blue will sort of mostly just be for the darker shades, just so it kind of keeps the bluiness of these greens, and then the black as well as a slightly blue toned color. So it should just keep the sort of slight bluey hint in there once we get to the sort of gradient maps and stuff like that. But anyways, that's all for later. Anyways, I will move on. I'll do this painted shading, and then I'll be back to do the detailed shading and all the last stuff. So yeah, I'll do this, and then I'll be back. So yeah. Alright, that's our painted shading. Wasn't much really to do. It was fairly easy. I decided to leave the symbol mostly alone. I feel like it looks a little better where it kind of pops a little bit. I was originally considering putting a bit of a glow on the white. You might have seen originally I sort of filled it in all as the one bit, but the reason why I did that was because I had I'd sort of thought about, yeah, making it, making the white sort of glow and make it a bit more 3D or something like that to sort of have it glow a bit around the symbol, but it just didn't look great to me, so I decided to leave it. Or it's just the idea wasn't sort of clicking in the way that I wanted in my mind, so I just decided to leave it as the sort of pure white. That way it just sort of pops a little bit more. But yeah, so now we've got to do the detailed shading. Again, the painted shading was very easy. It looks alright on the black. It just sort of, yeah, pops a little bit more. Now, because our light source is technically the ring, that means that the light is hitting his face at a bit of a strange angle. So it's hitting the sort of the sort of face, like around here. You're getting this bit of the nose is being lit, but then most of this side of the face is in shadow. So I'm going to apply a very thin light line around that side of the face, because if I get a bit too thick with it, it won't look very good. This is sort of a thing which I tend to avoid usually, but kind of the nature of the way that I've done this, can't really avoid it. I would have had to have completely flipped him. He would have had to have been facing this way if I wanted to get the light line on the other side, because the ring has to be on his right hand. So that's the problem that I would have been dealing with there, is the sort of place that the ring is positioned. So yeah, that just sort of means that the light line, I need to sort of just be a bit more thin about it, so that it doesn't end up making his face look weird. Again, as I say, I normally avoid putting a light line over on like the like around the face, mostly because it just sort of ends up creating these sort of problems. I typically try to put it around the back of the head if I can get it there. But yeah, let's just hope this doesn't result in anything looking too weird. I don't think it will. It should probably be fine, but who knows. The light line is going to wind up being underneath a lot of our sort of effects, so it shouldn't create any problems. But it will be interesting to see. Anyways, I'll make it green. I'll probably make it green just so that it sort of goes along with the sort of outer glow that he's got going on here, just so that it sort of fits with that sort of stuff. But in theory, that should work. I don't want it to be too distracting, so I think I'll probably have it be green. More or less the same type of green that sits on the outside of him. But yeah, so now I've got to do the detailed shading. I'm probably not going to go too crazy with this, even though this is obviously going to be intense in terms of colors. It's already kind of intense. Really, the thing that I need to do is clean up the sort of face here, because the face, the shading came out a bit blotchy, but that's just sort of part of the problem with some of these paints, is that it can come out that way. So it's come out a bit blotchy on his face, which is a problem. So I need to polish that up, and I'll be using the detailed shading to do that. To polish up this the sort of shading on his face. I will also need to technically do two light lines, actually, now that I think about it, because I'll need to do one which is underneath the detail lines, so that I can get the sort of clean edge. Then I'm going to need to do one which is over it, because his hair is part of the detail lines. So I'll need to just sort of dot in a little bit of a line along the top of his head there. I didn't think about that until now. This is always a problem whenever I'm doing hair this dark. Yeah. Anyways, I'll just get on with this. I'll do the detailed shading and the light line, and also do my first gradient map, and then I'll be back to do all the rest of that stuff, and then wrap up. So yeah. Alright, that is our detailed shading, our light line, and our first graded map done. So, I made green, or obviously, I made our light line green, and I had to do a secondary light line just to cover the top of the hair because it's too dark. And so now with the gradient map, something that's worth noting is that I have a pretty standard gradient here from a very dark, like a dark kind of bluey color, all the way up to a sort of almost yellow green. And so I think that looks pretty good. I decided to make it an overlay rather than a soft light because on soft light I feel like it doesn't give us quite the effect that I want. I feel like it's a bit more intense on overlay, which it usually is, but it's more intense in the way that I want it to be intense. It actually emphasizes the eye glow, shockingly as well, which is something that's borderline invisible otherwise. But yeah, this just sort of, it makes it a lot more vivid. It brings out those greens a lot more. Which we really need because the greens are otherwise just not quite vivid enough, I feel like, for me. So we're dealing with an overlay. That was I just left this open just so I could show off what the gradient map colors are. So let's make more gradient maps, 2 more gradient maps. So now I need to make a luminosity. This is going to make things a bit duller, but I should actually look at what this is. Underneath it's darker. Underneath it is darker and more vivid. Over it's a little brighter. I think I want it to be a little brighter and more vivid. 25%. Duplicate that, and then we will make this one a color burn, and this might get a bit intense. Right, so that's going to make our contrast a bit higher. So you only want a touch more contrast, so we'll leave that at 5%. Just as a tiny little nudge to our contrast. But yeah, right now let me grab my texture and that'll be our final touch. Now, I'm probably not going to have the texture be too intense because since we're dealing with very, very dark colors, that's going to start... well, it's going to look a bit much if I have it be too dark. Or if I have the texture be too intense. So I'll probably keep it kind of soft because otherwise it'll hit this pretty hard because everything's so dark. Right, okay. Let's slap this over. Put that to be an overlay. Bring it up to be about 25. Looks all right. Just sort of disperses some of these, some of the glow a bit nicer that way. How does that look? 25%. Let me zoom in. Well, the funny thing is that even though this is very dark, it's actually not hitting the outer edges of it so much. It does brighten them up a little bit to the point of where they're a bit more visible. But that's just because of our gradient in the background. Now the problem is it actually doesn't really blotch up the face a little bit. It actually smooths it out, if anything. Yeah, it sort of smokes up the background a little bit, which is, I mean, that's typically what's gonna happen whenever you've got kind of watercolory brushes. It's gonna tend to look a bit smokier. It sort of disperses that green a little bit more around the ring. It doesn't really do anything with the eyes. It does a little bit more with these sort of edge glow, with his sort of glow around his outer edge. It sort of just softens that in such a way, spreads it out a little bit, which I kind of like actually. Specifically around the face, because it looks like it has that sort of almost graininess to it, which I kind of like. Yeah, I think 25% is actually right for that. I think I just hit the Goldilocks zone there. I didn't really talk about the detailed shading because there's not much to write home about. I just sort of darkened the darker areas and brightened the brighter areas. I feel like it sort of did smooth out some of the parts on his face because otherwise those were a bit not right looking to me. The sort of parts on his face. Just the shading came out a bit blotchy. So yeah, I think I managed to smooth those out in such a way where it looks a little better. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That was a pretty quick one. All in all, 3.5 hours. I say quick. That's quicker than the last few have been. In recent memory, a lot of these have been touching like 4.5 hours to tend to float around 4 hours is how long these tends to be. But I kind of went in knowing this would be a bit of an easier one. Not necessarily easier, but quicker. Because it's mostly just the colors. And it's weird because the colors aren't a particularly challenging section usually. It just means that whenever something like the colors are quicker, it just sort of speeds everything up, because the colors are the second longest section. The longest section is always the details. By and large, it's always the details, because the details tend to take about an hour to do. So of the 3.5 hours, like an hour and a bit was the details, and then the colors was around like a little under an hour, and then everything after that was like progressively less. Which, I mean, that's typically how the sections of these things go. That's why I decided to squeeze together the detailed shading and the light line now. I used to do them separate, but I just bunched them together because it's quicker. It just makes more sense to put them together. It makes more sense to put them together because they're two very short sections. So rather than me coming back and just covering something very minor, such as the detail shading or the light line, it makes more sense to just do them together. And then even more recently, I threw in a gradient map, because I found that the first gradient map there was a lot of preamble which just wasn't adding anything, so I just truncated that and then slapped it onto to that section, so that then whenever I come back I just run through them very quickly, and then we move on, and then we're basically done. But yeah, realistically speaking, I think all the lighting and the effects and everything came out very nicely. This does definitely have a very distinct lighting environment to it, with all the sort of greens and everything. I don't typically do a lot of greens. It's not the type of thing I get to do very often, because there's not many characters. Well, it's not that there aren't many characters, it's just there's more characters that have red or blue as their color as opposed to green. Red or blue tend to be a bit more popular in that respect. Granted, the next one I'm doing is very blue as well, so that's the thing. Blue tends to be a very popular color in these drawings that I tend to do. Blue or red, but now those are two primary colors. Even though yellow is a primary color, people don't tend to use that one as much. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of rambling here. Is there anything else I really wanted to say before I just wrapped up? I'm fairly happy with this. I think it came out quite nicely. I think all the sort of greens and everything is very vivid. It's very vivid, it's very fun, it's quite poppy in that respect. But yeah, I think that's it. I think we're good to go. And I think I covered all the lighting and everything, the effects and all that stuff satisfactorily. In a satisfactory manner. I don't think satisfactorily is a word. It might be. I don't know. Anyways, I'm just extending this here. Anyways, yeah, I think I'll just do my outro, and then that'll be that. So yeah, if you liked the video, do whatever it is that you'd normally do, whether that be liking or not. I'd of course prefer if you liked it, but if you don't want to do that, I can't make you. All I can do is politely suggest it, which I believe I have done. It is the same deal if you want to subscribe. You could do that. I would very much like it if you did, but there's no pressure to do so. You've presumably seen a YouTube video before, so I don't need to remind you where the subscribe button is. It's below the video. But I didn't need to tell you that. However, I did. So, at the end of the day, I did end up saying it, so, well, here we are. If you have a suggestion for what you'd like to see me draw in the future, you can leave a comment, politely worded, or not at all. Of course, prefer if you just did it politely. But you don't have to do it at the end of the day. If you're going to do it, though, do it politely. I don't want to have to read any sort of impolite comments. It's just not a fun thing to spend your time doing. But yeah, with all that said, if you choose to watch the next video, I'll see you next time. And yeah, that's us, I'd say. So yeah, all I have to say now is goodbye, and then I will leave you. So,